welcome you back finally after what seems like too many long years of being on Zoom. So with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome not only the NSF folks who are here, but our wonderful folks from Montreux who are joining us perhaps for the first time. It is great to see all your faces. I have to say, as venues go, this is pretty spectacular. No offense to the Sands, but wow. So I'm thrilled that everybody's here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. But before we do that, I would like the NSF board members who are here to stand up, please. Stand up so people know who are the NSF board members. Excellent, thank you. And stay standing. Okay, so I have a very special announcement. Susan Malone is a new member of our board, and Susan is getting a very special honor next month, in July, in Washington, D.C. Susan was the first woman, one of two, of the first women class of special agents in the FBI 50 years ago. So she is going back to be honored by the FBI in July. And for those of you who watch NSF, watch that space, because we're going to be doing a feature article on Susan. And we are very honored to have her here and to have her be part of our board. And I hope you get a chance to congratulate her, because I can tell you, going through the FBI special agent training now, I can't even imagine what it would have been like 50 years ago. So with that, Kevin.
Good morning. I don't need a microphone.
Okay, I won't yell at you. I'm used to just my parade ground voice. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Kevin Schaller. I have the main chair for now for the NSF. I really appreciate you coming out. It is a nice venue. We hope to have a few more events here if we can this year. Thank you for supporting the NSF. Those of you that, my Montreux neighbors, we'd love to have you join as well to help support this. It is a nonprofit. We do some really great things for the local schools as far as teaching some good quality content about matters of state that are of great importance. So I really appreciate all of you being here. It's great to see you. We all need to kind of work on the COVID-19. So let's enjoy our time together and get outside and just have a wonderful time. Appreciate you putting together these great speakers. I'm a little punchy. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning working on a little paper. So
Kevin is defending his PhD thesis on Monday morning. So he was finishing his dissertation. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for the warm welcome to Montreux. So before we get started with our formal program, I have to give you some wonderful news about an event that we hosted at the end of May. So for the folks who are part of NSF, you know we do a youth security forum every year. And we did our youth security forum this year under creative COVID restrictions, and it was a huge success. So what we wound up doing, normally we work directly with the Washoe County School District, and we work with the students that are in the AP government classes, We the People program, and those types of things. And this year, and we try and bring all the students together, or at least we did before COVID. So we had 1 year beginning 2020 when we had to cancel the event altogether because of COVID. Last year, we did it all on Zoom, and it was okay. We just didn't get as much participation as we liked. This year, we had hoped to bring all the students together, but one of the COVID fallouts is there are no bus drivers. So we pivoted quickly, and we did a youth security forum from the classroom of Richard Clark in the Reno High School. Susan joined me. We did 7 sessions in one day. Let me tell you, going back to high school was a challenge for me. Going back to high school and being in the classroom for 7 sessions. And we had a Zoom setup, and we had professors from George Mason University. So we had 7 faculty members from George Mason. They came in on Zoom. We had the students in the classroom in Richard Clark's classroom. Now, Richard, unfortunately, had gotten COVID 2 days beforehand. So he Zoomed in from his backyard while Susan and I ran his classes in his classroom. We had between about 25 and 35 students in his class. Then we had other classes that came in on Zoom. So we reached about 200 students. We even had the high school from Incline participate for the first time. They came in on Zoom, and we had discussions with the students. They were required to watch our Ukraine program. So the theme of the Youth Security Forum was navigating the world impacted by the war in Ukraine. So what did this mean to these students? And we covered a whole diverse set of topics. They were required to watch some of the videos that we had done on our Ukraine series in advance. They came to the classroom, and they had so many questions for our faculty. So we had faculty from George Mason, and then we had Susan or Keith Hansen from NSF came in on Zoom as our NSF folks, and gave their perspective on the issues on the war. The students asked so many questions, we couldn't finish the questions in any of the classes. And then they had to take the information they had learned, turn it into a poster session, and they presented all their posters as their senior project in Reno High, and did all their presentations the first week in June. And I have great pictures from that. So I have to tell you that it was fabulous. It was amazing to talk to students who genuinely realized that the war in Ukraine was really hitting home for them. And so thank you for those who participated and helped and sponsored. We look forward to having more people involved in that event next year. We do it every year, just the week before Memorial Day. So with that, that's my NSF announcements. We'll regroup on our Ukraine programs, probably starting late July, early August. And then we hope to be back here again in September. I'm looking to set up a program about all those things that you think you really should know something about, like cryptocurrency, crypto assets, financial crimes, illicit finance, all these things that are being thrown around in the news right now that I think, myself included, would like to know a little bit more about. And it won't be why you shouldn't buy Bitcoin, but it will be about what's going on financially in the market of non-physical assets. So, and that'll be in September. I'll let you know the date as soon as I get it nailed down. So with that, welcome to today's program. So obviously we are in a position right now in the country where energy security is hugely important, right? How many people went and filled up your vehicles recently and went, oh. Yeah. I tried to go to Costco yesterday. I couldn't even get near the turnoff to turn in there. So yeah, painful things going on in the energy security world. So what we wanted to do with this program, you know, originally when I was thinking about this and we were bantering around ideas of how to organize the program, we were looking at, you know, the transition off of fossil fuels and how is that going to work and what are the sources of energy. And we've done that discussion in NSF several times. And the major question that we get asked and our speakers get asked in those programs is, okay, you're talking about renewable energies. Typically in Nevada especially, we talk a lot about solar. And everybody always asks, what happens when the sun goes down, right? Or the wind stops blowing. So this program is different. We're talking now about alternative energy sources in this that are constant energy supplies. They're not dependent on the weather. They're not dependent on the sun being out or the wind blowing or anything like that. These are alternative energy, may not be deployed at the scale we would like, but what I want to do is give you a flavor of two sources of constant energy that we have the ability in Nevada to really capitalize on. So our first speaker will be Craig Wuest from the Mission Support and Test Services, the contractor that operates the Nevada National Security Site in Vegas. And he'll be talking about small modular nuclear reactors, constant source of power. The second will be our colleague, where are you, Jim Faulds, who will be talking from University of Nevada, Reno, will be talking about geothermal and what we can do, some creative, innovative technologies to make geothermal more expansive and useful in Nevada. And then we are very honored to have Carolyn Barbash from NV Energy, because we're going to turn to Carolyn and say, okay, these guys are going to generate all this power. What are you going to do with it? So with that, I'm going to bring you up, Craig, and if you would be so kind as to, before you get into your talk, perhaps introduce this audience to MSTS and NNSS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you, Maureen. I want to thank Maureen and the organizers for inviting me to present to you today. Again, I'm Craig Wuest, the Senior Director for Mission Development at the Nevada National Security Site. Maureen asked me to give a little bit of an introduction to who we are. Mission Support and Test Services is the M&O contractor for the Nevada National Security Site. It has been for the last 4 years. So we're going on 5 years as the contractor that operates the site. Roughly 2,500 employees, almost $1 billion in the budget this year. Our budgets are going up. A lot of work going on underground as well as above ground, both for the Nuclear Weapons Stockpile Stewardship Program as well as our Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Programs. So we see business growing. We're hiring like crazy, doing our best to try to keep our heads above water with regards to our attrition. Definitely a generational change right now going on in our workforce. But we need to renew our skilled workforce as well as our skilled labor. We have a lot of union labor that works underground for us, miners, electricians, various folks. Okay, how's that? I see. So I have to hold the microphone a little bit like this. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so again, a very busy time for us. Lots of very interesting work. We have recently reorganized some of our management. I came 2 years ago from Lawrence Livermore Lab after 36 years at Lawrence Livermore in California, and a couple of Washington assignments, most recently 3.5 years in the Pentagon as the chief scientist for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Program. So my background right now is more focused on DoD and intelligence community support. We bring in other government users of our site and our laboratories to basically take advantage of the capabilities that we offer at not only in Nevada, but at our remote locations in Santa Barbara, Special Technologies Laboratory, and Remote Sensing Laboratory, one at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, and the other at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. So that's a little bit about MSTS. And I'll go ahead and switch over now and talk a little bit about nuclear power and energy security. Okay, so again, the title of my talk is Nuclear Power for Energy Security. What I want to first talk about is the fact that we actually are, I think, in a nuclear renaissance of sorts. I mean, we're not looking at building these massive gigawatt style, 3 Mile Island style kinds of reactors in the future. I think the future really is in small or I would say medium scale kind of 100 megawatt class kinds of reactors. But more than just the power generation of these reactors, it's the kind of technology associated with these reactors that is going to be different and beneficial, I think, in the sense of being able to manage things like the building, operation, maintenance, and the waste management of the reactors themselves. So what Maureen has been scrolling through, which is not the slides that I was intending to show, is actually a site capability study that we did at the Nevada National Security Site in partnership with the Department of Energy Office of Nuclear Energy and the Idaho National Laboratory National Reactor Innovation Center, or NRIC. Now, what they asked us to do was look at the site and see where we could put various reactor R&D capability that would not interfere with ongoing mission work in our stockpile program, but would have the right things that we need, like roads, power, water, that kind of thing. So we did that study last year. It's actually publicly released, so you can certainly get a copy of it and have a look at it. We've identified 5 different areas. Now keep in mind, the site is the size of Rhode Island, right? So it's big. It's big enough that you could actually model a microgrid, or maybe it's a milligrid. It's a sizable electrical power demonstration capability. And what we would like to be able to do, and we're exploring the options right now, is to combine a advanced reactor R&D program with solar and wind that we could then use for our own purposes to power the kinds of facilities that we have, but also to demonstrate how we would make the different kinds of power available for our community, if you want to call it that. And so basically a demonstration of a combined energy production facility or capability. Maureen mentioned the fact that these advanced reactors, and any nuclear reactor, is essentially a continuous source of power if you configure it appropriately. And so when the sun goes down, the solar power is certainly not going to be there for us. And the winds come and go. And so having a base load of nuclear power is certainly what we would like to be able to have to complement these other renewables. Now, I will point out, a large part of what we think about with nuclear these days is the potential for clean energy production, right? So nuclear power is carbon free. On the other hand, there are a lot of things that go into making nuclear reactors work that potentially are not necessarily carbon neutral. So you have to think about it in the broader context of the fuel cycle, everything from mining, making uranium fuel, to actually building the reactors, operating it, and then decommissioning it and disposing of the waste. Not really my intention to talk about that today. But I do want to highlight that there are companies out there, quite a few now, that are working to look at the next generation of small modular reactors. Among those are TerraPower, X Energy, BWXT, Westinghouse, NuScale, General Atomics. And we have been talking with all of these companies, well, most of these companies, regarding the possibility of partnering out at the site. Okay, so there's that slide that I'm referring to. It was there for a minute. There it is. Perfect. Thank you. Well, it's hard to see. I'll leave the slides here, for people to come up and have a look. What I'm showing on the right-hand side are actual graphics of some of the concepts that I was just talking about. Natrium is a sodium-cooled fast reactor up there on the upper left. And that's a TerraPower concept. X100, XE100 is an X-energy high-temperature gas reactor in the upper right. Eventually, microreactor, heat pipe reactors from Westinghouse, and then General Atomics fast modular reactor on the lower right. So these companies are really, I think, leading the technical advances that we're going to need for future reactor work, or future reactor operations and capability in the country. They're relatively low cost, I think, once they're up and operating and we get past the first commercialization and scaling up. And they offer, I think, really very interesting alternatives to some of the larger, like Diablo Canyon, San Onofre, Palo Verde style of reactors. So that was basically something I wanted to make sure you were aware of. On the next slide that I have essentially is the Department of Energy's program for how we go forward with advanced reactors. I want to make the point, energy security is national security. That is a theme that I think we should all remind ourselves of as we go through this discussion. And I will also say that there is a strong overlap between highly skilled, trained workforce in nuclear power and nuclear energy and our nuclear security programs for the country. Okay, that includes the stockpile programs, nuclear weapons program. Skill sets overlap significantly, and I will tell you that a country that does not have a good nuclear power program is at risk of not having a strong nuclear deterrent. And I'll just say that flat out. I think the United States needs to cultivate a much stronger nuclear energy program just for our national security as well as our energy security. Now, what I'm saying here is the Department of Energy has a program that I show here that basically is looking out over the next 15 years to build these concepts, actually support these companies, both private and public companies, that will team up, build these reactors, and actually demonstrate their capabilities. And so there's 3 phases. The first phase is to test, license, and build operational reactors over the next 5 years or so. Second phase is to basically build a better technical, operational, and regulatory environment to get these reactors up and operating commercially in the next 10 years, and get some of the more advanced reactors out there and understood for how viable they might be for the long term by the mid-2030s. So this is essentially what's called the Advanced Reactor Concepts 2020 or ARC-20 program. Now my last slide is a bit of a word. It's a bit wordy, but it is basically where we stand today. First, I want to reemphasize that we at the Nevada National Security Site really want to partner with our fellow laboratories, with private industry, to actually make our site available for the purpose of exploratory reactor R&D. And I think we've made some good progress in that regard. But we are not currently funded at all to do any reactor work out at the site. So again, it's all very early stage discussions, but we do have at least the foundations for moving forward with some actual work at the site. As you know, NNSS provides a remote but very highly secured facility or capability. So the reactor work that goes on out there can be done safely, securely, and more importantly, it can actually be used as a good surrogate for potential energy production and transmission to a community level, which I think is actually very exciting. The Department of Energy actually has just established this Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which just stood up about a month and a half ago. They have $20 billion from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, a lot of money. And about $2.5 billion of that is going into advanced reactor R&D. So the money is out there. We have to basically advocate, I think, with the support of our congressional representatives and senators, the governor's office, to basically let folks know Nevada, should be a partner with other parts of the country in developing this technology and taking advantage of the funding that is coming out of Washington. We've recently hosted the Secretary of Energy out at the site, Jennifer Granholm, our NNSA, National Nuclear Security Administrator, Jill Ruby, Senator Cortez Masto, Representative Susie Lee, and other staff. So they're certainly getting the message when they come out to the site about our capabilities, and we hope to be able to continue to enlist them and their support to build this up as a viable program going forward. So as far as I'm concerned, the state itself and the region stands to benefit from these initiatives. I think it definitely will increase the quality jobs available across the state, clean nuclear energy to ensure nuclear energy security for the state and the region, and a model that we can use for potentially expanding on across the country. Now with that, I'll stop and hand off to my next colleague here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. So we wanted to give you that insight because, you know, Nevada does have a huge advantage with having the Nevada National Security Site in Las Vegas. And because we have the capability and we've done so much nuclear work out there, that is a good place for us to be able to look at these small scale reactor concepts. And these are very different than the large utility scale Diablo Canyon and others that you've heard about. And I think it's important for us to look at that. I think one of the things that Craig just mentioned, which was really important, is maintaining the expertise in training in nuclear technology. So maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a nuclear physicist, but we need more opportunities to have students trained in this. And right now, even the nuclear Navy is having a hard time recruiting people into their cadre. So let's shift from nuclear. Maybe not everybody's a big fan of nuclear, doesn't know everything about it, but I do think it would be worth a visit when we're allowed to. Let's shift to something else that is available in Nevada and perhaps very available in Nevada if leaders like Jim Faulds take us to the next generation of geothermal. So take it away, Jim.
Great, thanks very much. So I'm going to start, I always like to start with a little view here. And this is a geothermal power plant. Oh, by the way, so I'm Jim Faulds, Nevada State Geologist. I'm director of the Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology. And that is the State Geological Survey for Nevada. Just about every state has a state geological survey. About 1/3 of the states, those state surveys are part of their respective university systems, and we're part of UNR. So we're a public service unit of UNR as well. We're housed within the College of Science at UNR, but we touch every corner of the state. And our primary mission is focused on understanding the mineral and energy resources in the state, also understanding the geologic hazards in the state, such as earthquake faults, landslides, flood hazards, and so on, and doing sort of basic geologic studies so that we can understand our resources and hazards, mitigate the impacts of major geologic hazards, and hopefully facilitate sustainable economic development in the state. Okay, so we're a statewide agency, but we're also part of UNR, sort of a hybrid between an academic department, if you will, and a state agency. So, and I've been head of the Bureau for about 10 years now. And one of the areas research-wise that I focus on is geothermal. And Nevada has been referred to as sort of the Saudi Arabia of geothermal energy. Okay, we have a lot of those resources in the state. So I'm going to start with a thermal power plant here. Steam's going straight up in the air, and we have a wind farm right there. And by the way, all forms of renewable energy are fantastic. I happen to have a bias for geothermal. Okay, so I'll just be transparent about that. And you can see that the wind farm, those turbines aren't moving, are they? Okay, okay, it's a picture, but the steam at the geothermal power plant is going straight up in the air. This is actually in late October. It was about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were camped here at a group of students. And an interesting area that you have, you know, sort of a renewable energy farm, if you will, and geothermal is cranking 24/7, and wind is great, but of course the wind has to blow. Okay, so one plug for geothermal. So geothermal is available 24/7. It has the smallest surface footprint of renewable energy compared to solar and wind, and it's reliable. There's vast conventional and unconventional, I'll explain the difference in a little bit, geothermal resources in this region. We have abundant heat everywhere. It's hot down there, okay, and I'll explain why. You drill down a mile or a kilometer or two, or even sometimes just a few hundred meters, several hundred feet, and you have high temperatures in this region thanks to our tectonic setting. The limiting factor is what we call permeability, and that's how fast water can flow through rocks, basically. Okay, and most geothermal, this is very important. and this is a challenge, most geothermal resources are hidden beneath the surface. Okay, they don't have surface hot springs or steam vents associated with them. And then something called EGS, which stands for Engineered Geothermal Systems, or unconventional resources, also offer great promise. I'll explain those. And of course, like anything, any type of energy resource, nuclear, geothermal, solar, wind, you need some kind of systematic workflow modeling and so on to make headway on that. So I'll sort of cover how does a geothermal system work, and then what the potential is in this region, the opportunities, the challenges, and then talk about some sort of strategies that we've developed at UNR to address that. There we go. So this is sort of a real basic diagram explaining how a conventional geothermal system works. So you need a production well, okay, and you need injection well. Basically, you have to replenish the system after you utilize the hot water. So you can think about a recipe for geothermal. You obviously need heat. You need permeability. Again, that's how quickly the fluids are flowing, or water's basically flowing through the rocks. You need the fluids, and then you need sort of a wise production injection sort of plan, a balance, if you will. And you're required to re-inject now, okay, for any system that's operating in the region. So if you inject though too close, okay, you'll cool the system down, okay, and you'll compromise your resource. If you inject too far away, you won't replenish the system. And so it's a fine balance, kind of finding the sort of correct place to have your production wells and injection wells. And just about any geothermal system that's developed goes through, a period where they're sort of refining that after their initial development. So that's how a geothermal system works. But of course, you need a power plant on top of that. And the technology today, and ORMAD Technologies in Nevada has been a leader in development of this, is the binary technology, binary geothermal power plants. Basically, you can produce electricity now with temperatures more than, if they're greater than about 120 C, which is about 250 Fahrenheit. And it's fairly simple. You have your hot water coming up, but you run that through a heat exchanger, and you heat up another fluid with a lower boiling temperature, such as hexabutane. And there's a couple different liquids you can use, and then you use that secondary fluid to drive your turbines, and that helps because you can more easily recirculate your resource, okay, with little to no loss, and then you can also recirculate your secondary fluid that's driving the turbines and produce electricity. And because you're boiling secondary fluid at a lower temperature than typical, you can produce energy, electricity at lower temperatures. And I should mention, you can get energy out of geothermal at much lower temperatures than this with direct use, okay? District heating, greenhouses, aquaculture, and so on. So I'm kind of focused today, though, on producing electricity to somewhat higher temperatures, if you will. Okay, so where are we in the U.S.? How are we doing? Well, about 0.5% of our energy in the U.S. is produced from geothermal. There's potential for much more, greater than 10%. Some say 20% or more. Nevada already has about 10 to 15% of our energy produced from geothermal. And it's important to realize that 1 megawatt of energy is enough for 750 to 1,000 residential homes, and that's 24/7, okay? And some of our power plants in the region have been operating since the 80s, early 90s, and they're still doing very well. Technology has also been advancing, so power plants get replaced and they're more efficient and so on. So this is Steamboat, the power plant on the south side of Reno that's producing about 80 megawatts. You can do the numbers, 80 megawatts, right? And let's just say we're all energy efficient in our homes, so that's 1,000 homes you can run those numbers and realize that can produce enough energy for a good part of residential Reno, although most of that power gets sold into the grid to California. McGinnis Hills in central Nevada is the system that just won't stop producing. I think Ormat's building their 4th power plant there now. They currently produce about 150 megawatts, and I was talking to them about a week ago, and they'll soon be producing, they think, close to 200 megawatts. And that's right in the middle of Nevada, near Austin, Nevada. These are the states in the western U.S. producing geothermal energy now. California actually produces more geothermal than Nevada, but we're second. But everyone agrees we have more resources than any other state. So important, we can convert some of our energy grid to geothermal. Why change? Well, it's a huge resource. Realize that the annual heat flow from the Earth is 10 times the annual energy consumption in the U.S. And you get fairly negligible greenhouse gases, and of course, energy independence, energy security, and so on is quite important. All right, so here's the western U.S., and I'll just talk about briefly geologically why this is such a great place for geothermal. This is what we call a temperature map, sort of a heat flow map. The warmer colors are hotter areas, and you can see it's hot. Okay, these are temperatures actually at 6.5 kilometers depth, but this is just a hot area, and the reason it's hot is the crust is being pulled apart, extended in this region. So warmer parts of the Earth, the upper mantle, are getting closer to the surface. The crust is relatively thin here, and that leads to what we call a high geothermal gradient. Okay, and in addition to that, we have lots of faults. We're the 3rd most seismically active state in the country, and so we need those faults providing sort of a connection to the hotter rocks at depth, and we've got plenty of those around. So in addition to that crustal extension, that creates a little bit of dilation along the fault. Crust is spreading here. We are actually the fastest growing state in the country. So that's a trivia question. Tectonically speaking, we actually add about 2 acres to Nevada every single year. Okay, so yeah, and that's why we have earthquakes. Okay, and that's why we have a lot of geothermal activity. Hot water can readily circulate back up to the surface. And these are just parts of the western U.S. where geothermal is a ready resource. You can see there's a big bullseye here, and what we call sort of the Great Basin region. Some of you maybe heard the term basin and range province. Kind of means the same thing. So currently across this region, there's 3.7 gigawatts, and this includes California of capacity. So this is a map of this Great Basin region. All of the purple stars, you probably can barely see those, are operating geothermal power plants. There's about 27, I think, of them. And this is just this region. We're excluding parts of California here. There's about 1 gigawatt, actually more than that now, of capacity for all the power plants. But there's great potential, and some estimates are that there's 30 gigawatts or more of potential. So, and this is just charting production just in Nevada through time. You can see we've been going up and up. But why isn't it more? There's vast resources around, and I'll talk about some of the challenges, and then what are the best practices and exploration strategies. So this is a major challenge. This is a very geologic diagram. This is actually a vertical profile through the crust. These are faults, and you can find fault with anything in Nevada because they're all over the place. There's a big fault just to the west of us here in Montreux and so on. Lots of faults riddling Reno. But the fluids come up along those faults, and you think you could just target the fault, right? Well, it's not so simple. Sometimes the fluids come up along a fault, and they actually emanate as hot springs or steam vents right there, and you kind of know where to target. But more commonly, the fluids come up along the fault. They hit what we call permeable, like sandy layers, sedimentary layers. The hot spring may be many kilometers away from the source at depth. But more often than not, we know that that hot water never sees the light of day, never gets to the surface, and we call these hidden or blind systems. Okay, 40% of the known systems in Nevada are blind or hidden, and almost all of those have been discovered by accident. Okay, agricultural wells or mineral exploration wells, things like that. We estimate that probably 75% or more of these resources are hidden or blind. So we have to use our sort of geologic smarts to find these resources at depth. And it's really not much different than what the hydrocarbon petroleum industry faced decades ago. Okay, you know, Jed Clampett, most of this audience is old enough to, okay, you know, yeah, seriously, you know, there were oil seeps and so on in the first couple decades of the petroleum industry, and those quickly were panned out. Okay, same thing with geothermal. Okay, we've hit kind of the easy, the spots, and the secret to finding more is understanding where these hidden resources are. So that's a challenge, and it's a challenge because we know we can have a productive well just a couple hundred meters, a few hundred feet away from a non-productive well. And so there's sweet spots, if you will, down there where the hot fluids are coming up along. So, and I'll just add that you've heard lately there's some environmental impacts in some cases from geothermal development. Maybe you've heard of the Dixie Valley toad. Okay, we develop these hidden resources. Okay, at depth, we don't have to worry about those kinds of impacts. Okay, so and that I'll let others decide whether that's important, you know, in terms of the Dixie Valley toad and so on, and where that will end up. But I'm just saying, if we're developing these hidden resources, the environmental impacts, if there should be, they're far, far less. So a couple of very geologic slides to show folks how we're approaching this. So one is we need to understand what's at the surface. And we know there's certain fault patterns that are indicative of that geothermal activity. And we know that by basically cataloging all of the known systems and understanding and cataloging them based on their fault patterns. Okay, and so there's about 6 basic fault patterns that control almost all of the systems in this region. Okay, so this would be work at the surface, and these are young faults. These are active faults, basically faults that have ruptured, and a million years is nothing to a geologist. Okay, so let's say a fault that's been active in the last million years. That's young, geologically speaking. Okay, so these young faults and then these certain patterns can be correlated with the geothermal activity, so then we can use them as a proxy to find these hidden systems. Okay, but we have a gazillion faults around here. It's great for someone like myself who studies faults. But which of those faults then actually have these hidden systems at depth? And you know, even though we can key into these patterns, we know that those patterns don't always have a system at depth. Okay, so then we need to use geophysical data to sort of peer into the subsurface. And there's several different types of geophysical data. There's gravity data. Slight differences in gravity, density of rocks can tell us where faults are located at depth. Magnetic data, those hot fluids will alter rocks, okay? And something called electrical conductivity or magnetotelluric data, same thing, where it sort of can tell us where fluids are at depth. And then something called seismic reflection data, where we're sort of bouncing sound waves, if you will, off of the rocks at depth. So the key to success, though, is integrating all of those data types. And so you need a sort of a systematic workflow, and then you need to figure out how you group those different data sets, how you weight them. And you can do that by comparing to the kind of what values you have for all of those different data sets at the known systems. And basically we can end up producing these geothermal potential maps. This is one that we did a couple years ago for about 1/3 of Nevada. The warm areas indicate areas with higher geothermal potential. And then when you get studying a specific area, these days you can develop these beautiful 3D models. So one success story, this was a DOE funded project, 2014 to 2019. The tail end of that project was, if you're so smart and you think you've got a good methodology, here's a little bit of money for drilling. Prove your verify your methodology. We did that at 2 sites, and we're 2 for 2. We're batting 1,000. This is one site in Gabbs Valley in West Central Nevada. We used combined all those features, weighted them, and so on, and drilled, and we found 124C at just a couple hundred feet below the surface in an area that had been never explored before. There was no indication of geothermal activity at depth. Then real quick, engineered geothermal systems. Remember I said it was hot everywhere? The permeability was the key for the conventional systems. Well, what if we could just mine that heat? Okay, if we can but to mine the heat in an area where you don't have permeability to begin with, you have to create your permeability. So you have to go down and fracture the rocks. That is a form of fracking, much different than what they need to do in the oil industry. But you fracture the rocks once, okay, you create your own permeability, and then you run fluids through it. Okay, this is technology that's probably a couple decades away from fruition, but there's a national lab now focusing on this in western Utah, near Milford, Utah. This is called FORGE, Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy. And basically, they're researching how we can efficiently go down and fracture hot rocks and create our own geothermal systems. And if we do this, the sky's the limit for geothermal. Okay, we can produce well over 100 gigawatts. So I won't read this slide because I've gone too long, but these are the conclusions. We have tons of geothermal energy out there, and we have new methodologies to look for these hidden systems. And I just leave you with this view of another energy farm at Stillwater out near Fallon. And this is a geothermal power plant, solar array, and that's the moon. Okay, the geothermal power plant's still cranking, but the solar array has gone to sleep for the evening. So anyways, thanks a lot. Sorry.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So, Carolyn, why don't you come up and give your introduction while I get your slides up. So, the good news is that Nevada is poised through geothermal and innovative new generations of geothermal, potentially through nuclear, to generate a whole lot of power. And we're going to do what with all of that power? So we turn to our expert from NV Energy, Carolyn Barbash. I will get that up. You introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Carolyn Barbash from NV Energy. I'm the Vice President of Transmission Development and Policy, which means mostly I'm working on the GreenLink projects. If you've heard of them, they're about 700 miles of 500 and 345 kilovolt transmission through Nevada. One will be our second tie, originating in the Ely area and terminating in Las Vegas, and that'll be in service at the end of 2026. And the other is a 500 kV line going from the Yerington area over to the Ely area, and that will be completed and in service by the end of 2028. We also have from Yerington going up into the high growth load areas of the Trick area and things like that, where a lot of our customers, just a crazy amount of growth has occurred, and a lot of them want to be served with low carbon or zero carbon energy. And so we've got some 345 lines to take all the renewables we're going to interconnect on these big 500 kV lines into those areas, as well as throughout northern and southern Nevada. And I'm also working collaboratively with other states. In the last session of the legislature, we had an omnibus energy bill that requires all transmission providers in Nevada to join a regional market. So historically, we've all been trading bilaterally, big utilities getting together and saying, hey, what do you got to sell me to supplement the power plants that I own, or what can I do to more economically serve my customers today? And this would be more than an organized market that has price settlements like a stock market, if you will, transitioning from a closed market where people get on the phone and trade closed stocks to a price settlement that makes it a little bit more liquid and easier to optimize your resources. So that's what I do. I'm going to talk broadly more about NV Energy today. And do you want me to kind of go to the summary so I can catch us up on time? I prepared because I thought I only had 5 minutes. So I can do either. Okay, and I apologize. Don't look for my faults. I am not a geologist or a scientist. I'm an engineer and I'm kind of nerdy. I don't have a lot of graphics and I don't run slide presentations very well or do public speaking very often. So don't look for the faults. I'm not a geothermal plant. I can do it. I'll do it. All right. Okay, just a couple of bragging points. NV Energy's been around for about 100 years, right? We started by having to serve the Comstock load. So if that tells you we've been around quite a while. We cover about 46,000 miles of territory. We have 1.5 million electric customers, and we also serve natural gas here in the Truckee Meadows area, probably approaching about 300,000 customers in that area somewhere. We employ 2,300 employees full-time as employees. We also employ a lot of contract work around the state and support a lot of Nevada businesses by buying their materials and their services. We're the second highest taxpayer in the state of Nevada. Probably when I get done with my transmission projects, could be the first. I don't know yet. Quite an honor. Let me just tell you a little bit about our price to brag. We're 55% electric prices as of the end of 2021. We're 55% lower than California, about 20% less than the national average, about 4% less than the mountain states. And we are working hard to find clean energy. One, we're required to by a renewable portfolio standard, and we also want to help the state get to its net zero carbon goal by 2050. We donate about over $500,000 of the over $5 million in community support we give every year out of our foundation and employee contributions, you know, in the realm of protecting wildfire prevention and clean energy and, you know, and education. Grants, etc. Okay, so what is NV Energy doing to help this transition off fossil fuel? We have great progress towards renewable energy. You know, the RPS standard in the state is to get to 50% by 2030. We are already at 29%. We reached that in 2020. And that's the 2022 requirement. So we've already reached this year's goal, but we did that 2 years ago. We want to get to 100% renewable energy, but we want to do it with balancing, you know, affordability and not creating unnecessary waste. We're coal-free in Southern Nevada. As far as emissions reduction goes, we will close our last coal plant in Northern Nevada in 2025 and replace that with solar and battery storage out in the Battle Mountain area where the Valmy plant is, replacing some jobs out there. So that's a great concern of ours is our employees and retraining them. We're also investing in long-term storage. I think we've got about 15,000 megawatts of storage and more to come. Some of that's standalone on our transmission lines so that we can capture that very low cost solar energy at night and use it during the day. And some of it's tied to our solar plants. I should say we have been a long-term supporter of geothermal. We started buying out of our first geothermal plant in 1987. I think I was just coming in as a student intern. And we love geothermal because it is base load. And like you heard, though, it's a little bit more capital intensive than these cheap solar panels with all the technology and development that's got, you know, you don't have to drill and then find there's no resource or there is a resource or it's not hot enough. But we would love to see more geothermal. It's ideal base load, clean energy that goes all night long. Like I say, we have 57 renewable energy plants in the form of geothermal, solar, little tiny biomass. Wind's not a great resource in Nevada because it's either wind's not blowing or it's blowing the wind, the wind's blowing the wind off the turbines, right? We don't have that nice, consistent Montana and Wyoming wind. And we have tiny bit of hydro on the Truckee River, getting less and less, as you can imagine, and a lot of hydro allocation down in southern Nevada from the Hoover plant, which is falling off as well. So we also, as you heard, are looking at transmission, and the GreenLink projects with a $2.6 billion investment in Nevada is just scratching that surface. And we have other projects in the plans. Let me tell you about these GreenLink projects. Let's see if there's any other cool slides I'm missing by not scrolling through. I think I covered all that. Oh, electric transportation. We're also investing up to $100 million over the next 3 years in electric charging stations, in underserved communities, throughout rural communities, so that you can actually travel with an electric car without getting that range anxiety. And then we will manage the time of use issues. We certainly don't want folks charging their electric cars in the middle of a hot day when we need all the energy we can get. So we'll incent that through very well managed pricing tariffs for vehicle charging to incent folks with electric vehicles to charge very low cost at times when energy isn't scarce and lower priced. Let's see if I missed anything. There's a picture of our renewable energy that I was talking about earlier. 57 large scale plants around the state. The blue is our geothermal. The orange is our solar investment. You can see most of it's concentrated in Clark County down there. And then a tiny bit of hydro over there on the border of California, and a wind plant out in eastern Nevada. There's our emissions reduction, pretty impressive, right? We reduced carbon by 50% since 2005. And this is really important because this is what we have left, and that's really expensive to get rid of, right? So by helping the transportation industry clean up, which is the largest emissions producing sector right now, we can make a lot more headway. I already went over our battery storage, 1,500. I was right. Good. Corrected myself. And we also have a lot of incentives for rooftop solar. And these are my projects. This is the transmission line we're building. Let me talk about why we're building these. Remember the slide James had up here with the geothermal resources? Well, I wish I had overlaid the solar resources and the geothermal resources and everything, but this is running right through some very rich geothermal areas crossing through the Dixie Valley, this 500 kV line. We have a very tiny, not tiny, a fully subscribed 230 kilovolt line running across this. We're going to follow this route here with it, and we're going to be able to pick up a lot of this renewable potential here, and that goes into service in 2028. This one runs through some geothermal, some solar, some wind, and this has some wind as well, just not really, as high quality as some of the other states. So that's a main goal, to unlock some of these renewables within Nevada, create the economic development that goes with it, the jobs that goes with it, the property tax infusion into those rural communities, and clean up our energy profile. So, and we can get that lower cost out of these plants that will, help reduce the price of energy and hopefully offset the cost of these projects to our customers. The other reason, we very carefully planned these. this is very well interconnected to other states that produce very complementary resources to our main resources, which are geothermal and solar, primarily here in Nevada. That's what we're blessed with. There's some pumped hydro potential here, which is another form of storage out in eastern Nevada. And then we can interconnect up here where there's strong interconnections to hydro resources, high quality wind resources, and the wind oftentimes does blow at night and pick up in other states while the sun's down. So it's another form of creating low carbon energy and getting into the state without a fossil fuel. And a way to increase our business development in Nevada by selling to some of these states in the north and to our east that don't have the high quality solar or geothermal resources that Nevada has. So it's a really nice balance and trade-off. The other thing that this does, this line, besides unlock a ton of high quality solar resources and geothermal and wind, is it's our second tie to Southern Nevada. And when this line goes out, it could be wildfire. It will be out until we rebuild line, So it depends on what knocked it out. And right now, that first connection that went in service in 2014 saves our customers, by the diversity of the climates and the types of resources and what's going on, well over $20 million a year. So we don't like to lose that line very often because that's money for our customers, which we pass straight through. And we'll have another connection here. And then we'll complete a circuit for nerdy electrical engineers like me where you can lose any one of these and still serve every other point of delivery. So I love that part. Really excited about that. It's also going to create a lot of economic development in the state. A lot of jobs just over the 10-year construction period, which is unfortunately how long it takes to get a transmission line through the NEPA process and built. We'll start receiving all this economic benefit before we actually put this project into rates. So customers won't see this in this economic recovery time, the cost of these projects. They won't see it until the projects are complete. And we're going to do everything we can to mitigate that with lower cost energy and any kind of pricing mechanisms we can do to spread it out and kill the pain a bit. Okay, this is the omnibus energy bill that was passed that requires our state transmission providers, of which we're primarily it, with some small rules, with some little bit of transmission, to join a regional market by 2030. I won't go in. I think I spent enough time on what it is at a high level. There is so much going on this front regionally. Literally, I can sit for 8 hours of meetings every day, and I try to delegate that because it's a little hard to do sometimes, of different footprints looking at a regional market. Obviously, we're going to look at what's best for Nevada. So we've got our California market, which we currently participate in, just in the real time only, just an imbalance market. So we participate with the California ISO in real time just to optimize our resources. We have a state task force looking over this. These are the members. It's chaired by Chris Brooks, but he just resigned. So looking for a new chairman when he goes out this next legislative session, I think. I covered what it is. It is way too nerdy and in-depth to get into very long here. But let's just say, look at this regional diversity. If you can get more time zones, more climates, more resource diversity involved in your electric portfolio, the better off we're all going to be. If we're really going to meet these carbon goals, the only way to do it economically is to join up as a region and optimize our resources together. So working hard on that. And we're looking at 3 different alternatives right now. We're currently in a real-time market, as I say, with the California ISO. It's benefited our customers straight pass through 164 million to date. The regional efforts of it, all that are involved, which is all the colored states here, is 2 billion a year so far since its 2015-14 inception. And it's covering really most of the Western interconnection. They're proposing to move to a day ahead where you can actually plan on what units you commit in this region. A lot of kinks need to be worked out there. If we're going to be in a full regional market by 2030, we have to be really careful here in Nevada about our next step, because the governance of the California ISO is set up such that the governor of California appoints the board members and the governance, and they decide very important things in a long-term market, like who's going to pay for the transmission system and how much. So little leery, I don't know that our legislators would be comfortable with that as a solution, but there's always a chance, you know, to take their machines and all the work that we've invested in with our models and create a new governance structure perhaps. But then there's also other alternatives. And this group over here, without California, is looking at it at potentially expanding the market to the east of us. That's kind of attractive because those are the resources I was talking about that are a lot more complementary to Nevada. California has a lot of the same load profile, a lot of solar, so do we. So we don't want to exacerbate each other's problems. And really, we're just looking at collaborating together with all those people trying to decide which way to go and doing a lot of studies. And I'll wrap it up there for questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate your patience. Can I get my speakers to come up here? So I'm sure you have questions. Questions? Hold on. The one with the short legs is going to run the microphone around.
Here's my question. We have a number of nuclear plants in this country right now that are shutting down, even though they're good baseload 24/7 plants with decades of life left in them. And they're shutting down because of regulations that require them to back off if the wind's blowing or the sun's shining and renewables are generating power. So my question is, what's the incentive to build more 24/7 baseload plants like geothermal or nuclear if they're going to be subject to that same sort of requirements?
Excellent question. So who wants to take that one? We're all going to point at Craig.
Yeah, so I actually, can you hear me okay? I actually read an article about 3 Mile Island, premature close down of one of their reactors. And the reason, and this is in Pennsylvania, the reason is that they were not competitive economically with other energy sources. And that was, determined that they particularly with cheap natural gas that was coming out of the region there. So I think that, right, nuclear is not necessarily automatically a solution because it has to be combined economically with all the other providers and it has to be competitive. Now, the question is, are these smaller reactors more economically viable? Do they produce lower cost electricity or other products that would make them more attractive? And I think that is not completely understood at this time. So the economics of small modular reactors and nuclear power is really shifting as our energy production landscape shifts, particularly with regard to other renewables. So I don't know that I'm certainly not an expert in any of this. So I'll just basically say that there are plenty of others who are looking at, does it make sense to build up this, diverse set of energy production capability? My feeling is that it does, but we would have to really understand the trade-offs. So that's the best I can do in terms of an answer.
I do have a question for you. Well, one of the things, especially in Nevada, I really think that nuclear's come a long way and it's gotten a lot safer, and the technology has really improved the economics of it. But they used to require a lot of water, which isn't something Nevada has, and I think it's a very emotional thing here in Nevada, water. So can you talk about that a little bit? And then I think there's also an off-put because of the Yucca Mountain controversy, where nuclear in Nevada is not thought of highly. And if that's any impact on the nuclear industry. I know I'm not supposed to ask questions, I'm supposed to answer them, but I had to.
No, I think that's fine. Well, some of the reactors that I showed in my slides are not water-based. So some of the possible solutions are some of them are liquid metal energy exchange systems. Sodium, for example, can be a liquid metal that allows for this heat exchange process that you still have to have to make electricity through some kind of a heat exchange process. Some of these reactors are also direct electricity production reactors. Some operate on various kinds of physics principles that allow that. So you don't need to actually make steam and turn turbines anymore. Now, I have to say, those are very highly advanced concepts that require validation. So, I would say, stay tuned. I don't think we're anywhere close to having those commercialized anytime soon. So, yes, water is going to always be needed. And the question is how much water is really required. Regarding waste storage, I know it's sort of the big elephant in the room. And we at the NNSS are not a waste storage site. And Yucca Mountain is not part of the Nevada National Security Site. So I'll just make that clear. If we have test reactors on site, we will arrange with the reactor providers that they are responsible for the waste. They will take that waste after whenever it's done and remove it from NNSS. I don't know if it'll end up in Yucca Mountain or in other parts of the country, but we will make it very clear we are not a waste storage site for any reactor R&D in our area of responsibility. My boss, Mark Martinez, who's a board member, I believe, here as well, and the president of my company, is very adamant that has to be clear, that we cannot accept waste from any of our R&D activities that might come from private industry. So I guess that's sort of my answer. Okay.
Thank you. Let's see. Promised you next.
I want to expand on Carolyn's question because there was a slide up there about, I believe the number was $2.5 billion from the infrastructure bill to fund additional research into this area. How much of that is going to come to Nevada, and how much? Explain a little bit more about what went to Idaho. And I saw there was a slide about collaborating with Idaho, because I think part of the Yucca Mountain question is we wouldn't take it, but Idaho said they would. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we are collaborating with Idaho on the site study that I mentioned. At this point, I think Idaho is actually going to be hosting a demonstration reactor project. I don't know the details in terms of how they're managing, the long-term waste issue. So this is something that I just am not familiar with. But in terms of partnering, we have other options we're looking at, particularly for other companies that want to try out different reactors. Now, I will say there's also a reactor that is going to be built in Wyoming, and that is part of, I may be not quite correct, I think it's NuScale. I think it's Bill Gates' company that he's partially sponsoring. It's actually going to be sited in Wyoming, of all places. The siting of reactors is partially political. Let me put it that way. Partially political, right. So if there's a desire in Nevada to site a test reactor, not necessarily in our location, but in other locations, that's certainly something that I think we all should be cognizant of and try to understand the pros and cons of as well. As far as the waste goes, like I said, other laboratories are dealing with their own waste however they want. It's not a common theme across our R&D activities.
Actually, the demonstration project in Wyoming is a Berkshire Hathaway project. Berkshire Hathaway owns NV Energy too. It's a sister company of ours. It's Pacific Corp, so not Bill Gates, the other guy, Warren. He is the one and they're in partnership with TerraPower. And so we're very interested in these new technologies, but of course it's in a place where there's more water and not quite the fight against, if you're willing to generate nuclear, why can't you store it in your state? And so we don't want to walk into that unless y'all want to help me educate Nevadans about the fact that it's safe now.
That's our job. Education. Okay. Hold on. Let's see. Susan, 2, 3. Hi, thank you very much for being with us today. I, as a customer, would like to know, and perhaps the three of you can sort of share on an answer on this. The bottom line, it's bottom line up front. All of these projects are great. I see putting lots of money into these projects, but how is it going to affect us as customers with our rate increases in electricity, or banning? California just had a new law, I think, that they're banning, natural gas in the new homes. A lot of us use natural gas here, but I think when we're paying $7 per gallon, what are we looking at? What can we expect? We have a diminishing source of water through these western states and the drought that we have, and a lot of the electricity depends on the hydroelectric power. What do you foresee for us in the future, foreseeable future, in what's it going to cost bottom line? What bill am I going to get to my house, or what are we going to pass to help us alleviate that problem? Thank you, Susan.
Since most of you are probably our customers with NV Energy, I should probably take the first shot at that. I say we're trying to do this smart. We have a goal of getting to 100% renewable because we think it's the right thing to do. But until our customers can afford it, or until we see the growth, or we have to retire a traditional fossil fuel plant, then we replace it with that. We're not just out building renewable plants that we don't need yet. We're doing it to serve customers. And until the availability, talk about the war in Ukraine, we're having supply chain issues, and there's a way increased demand for solar panels and things like that. So they're tough to get, and they're changing the viability of these projects. We will serve our customers. We'll do it the cleanest and the lowest cost we can. And if that takes natural gas, well, we'll need to do that until the technology comes down and we can get the equipment in. We will, and we will serve them 24 hours a day, not just during the daytime. So we have the philosophy that you build to serve the growth or to replace a retired plant. We're not just out building renewable energy just to add renewable energy.
I'll add a couple words to this. First is there's a great film called Switch. Maybe some of you have seen that, where it's talking about transition of the energy grid. It's not going to happen overnight, and it needs to be a balance of multiple types of energy resources and slowly phasing some out, like fossil fuels, and phasing others in. It's by Scott Tinker, actually state geologist of Alaska, and you should be able to just Google that and find that. And it's I think it's been on NPR and things like that, or public broadcasting and so on. So and then again, I can speak to geothermal. First, if you're thinking there's a water issue with geothermal, generally not. These resources are deep, and actually you go deep, and if you have permeability, there's water, okay? And these are geothermal brines, typically a mile at depth or a half mile, I think in metric. So let's say several hundred meters to a couple kilometers deep. And it's well below all of our important shallow aquifers for drinking water or agriculture and so on. So it's a different ball game in that, and you're required to case the wells. could not have any interaction between those shallow aquifers and those deeper geothermal brines that you're bringing up to turn your turbines. And then I'll just say too, with respect to geothermal and probably other renewable sources of energy, the costs, it is economics, right? But the costs are, I would say, on average, more stable. You don't have these swings. Okay, the war in Ukraine obviously affects a lot of things, and supply chain shortages can affect some of the aspects that are important, some of the raw materials. Okay, important for renewable energy. But once you develop it, it's fairly stable and sustainable, and maintenance costs are relatively low. And so you have sort of a stable, sort of, more stable fixed price through time, although I'm not an expert on any of those economics. So
in regards to cost associated with nuclear power and particularly the advanced reactors, I think we still have a lot of work to understand, is it cost effective? Will it actually, be viable with regard to other energy sources? Now, the thing about these small reactors, I did not mention, some of them produce extremely high temperatures, like 1,000-degree scale temperatures. What can you do with those high temperatures? You can make all kinds of interesting things, like chemical reactions, hydrogen production. So there are spin-outs from these reactors that may make them more economical, but not necessarily focused on the energy output as much as their ability to produce other sources that you might take advantage of. In the chemical area, things like taking some of the byproducts of fossil fuels and making fertilizer out of it, that is hard to do otherwise. But hydrogen production is also a direct benefit that you can use for powering other sources. Back to the question about how much of that $2.5 billion is coming to Nevada. Right now, I don't think any of it is. The private companies that we're talking to would like to get some of that money and partner with us. And so we would enter into some sort of partnership that could, draw some of that money into various projects in Nevada. So we'll have to wait and see.
Thanks. Okay, somebody back here.
Yeah, you talked about, I guess, large-scale reactor TMI being shut down because of the cost of energy. I'm assuming you're familiar with the levelized cost of energy for the SMRs, and that's multiples of the large-scale reactor at this point in time. So I'm just trying to understand from a cost standpoint. And Geo's kind of in between the two, and knowing that NV is certainly interested in costs, I'm a little interested in whether you believe the cost of SMR, on an installed megawatt basis, will be coming down if that technology proves true. The second question about SMRs is there was the latest issue of the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences has reached the opposite conclusion relative to the waste generation associated with SMRs. He's read the article. That's good. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that as we talk about the Aussie Bear Yucca Yucca Mountain.
Excellent, thank you. And for those who didn't catch that, SMRs is small modular reactors. So Craig, you're up.
So, when we talk SMRs, we're talking 100 megawatt class or maybe slightly higher, right? And so the cost associated with those reactors is, I think, based on how many you can actually produce and put into service. So it's a question, will these things scale up and provide, a cost that is greater than, or a benefit that is greater than the cost of actually producing, the physical reactor itself, the fuel and all of that is required, the maintenance, the long-term, costs associated with the life cycle of these reactors. It's an economics question. I don't think it's actually been taken that seriously until recently, because SMRs were just sort of a concept and not too many people were really thinking about it. Now I think it's getting a lot more attention. So I would say, there are university groups that are starting to pay more attention to the economic side of it. I am not an economist, so I'll have to just beg off on that. As far as the waste storage in the Academy's paper, Well, okay, so that is NuScale that they were focusing on. NuScale has pushed back on their assertion that SMRs produce more waste per unit volume than a large gigawatt class reactor. I read the papers. I've listened to or talked with some folks about it. I don't know what the answer is. I think right now you're seeing the problem is that some of these companies are holding back some of their details for reasons having to do with trade secrets or patents or whatever, you know. So they're not giving full disclosure in terms of how their fuel burn up rates are and how, you know, what kinds of byproducts are going to be, what kinds of reactor non-nuclear waste will be produced. And so I think, you know, it's going to be a dialogue for a while. I think, you know, it has to be looked at, obviously, right? But I think this is just the beginning of a long, you know, difficult discussion regarding, you know, thinking about our waste storage problems in this country that continue to be not resolved. So again, I think, you know, this just brings up more difficult issues that have to be worked.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I was going to take one last question and then other questions. Our speakers will stay for just a few minutes so you can come up and talk to them directly.
My question is really directed to NBE, and it is, do you see a day when NBE will want to encourage residential homeowners to produce enough energy to not only use it for their own home, but store it and then use it and sell it to NBE or some other source that needs the energy to try to get to your goal for zero non-renewables?
Excellent. Thank you. I know, Carolyn, you said you were going to duck the personal solar, but
yeah, and I'm not in the demand side management, but we do rely on that heavily. We have a lot of programs for solar rooftop. What our regulator was finding was that it was, you know, we were subsidizing a bit because we were buying it back at the cost, you know, 8 cents or what, you know, our retail rate. And we can produce it with utility scale for 2 cents. And so what was happening is we were paying the folks that could afford rooftop solar 8 cents and charging all our customers, including our low income customers, for that energy that could have been produced at a lower cost. And so our regulator was finding that it was time to, that was encouraging the technology for quite a while. And it really brought down the cost of that technology, which was a good thing. But they were finding that that was kind of the wrong way to subsidize, was having folks that could afford to install solar panels and have low-income customers pay that rate. So those types of programs were phased out. There's grandfathered programs in place. We still buy back the energy. I think it's at a lower, it's not at such a premium anymore. It's closer to the wholesale cost, although still quite a bit more. So we do that, and I do see us continuing to encourage that demand side management. We are focusing on getting rooftop solar installed in more low-income homes and on parking lots and things like that to kind of balance that equation out at the request of our regulator. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
excellent. Thank you. Sorry, George. Oh, all right. Just because you're George. You got.
Thank you. Worldwide, we've got wars. We've got incredible droughts. What about desalination and wastewater treatment?
Excellent. Okay, guys.
Right, I should have mentioned that as well. I mean, desalination can actually be benefit from any energy source, right? It's an energy-intensive process. So yeah, if you have a nuclear power solution that, you know, could be applied, it will be applied, and as long as it's economical. Sorry. Well, almost all of the reactors I'm familiar with are using what's called high assay, low enriched uranium. And so, but there's still byproducts associated with burning that kind of fuel. You still have to enrich it, and we don't have a strong enrichment capability in this country right now either. That would have to be solved as well. I think maybe there is a possibility for using geothermal, and I'll defer.
I suppose possibly. Of course, you've got to have the geothermal in the right location for the desalinization. I mean, there's a lot of geothermal in the Imperial Valley of Southern California, Salton Trough, but I know next to nothing about the desalinization, can't even say it, process. So I would leave that to other experts and whether you could couple those. There's a lot of thinking, though, about coupling geothermal with other, you know, sort of processes and so on, even extracting some critical minerals like lithium from geothermal fluids and so on. So there's a lot of folks thinking about combining various things, but I don't know about the desalinization process.
Well, thank you very much to our panel. This has been a great discussion. I hope you got a little flavor of some of the energy security issues that we're dealing with in Nevada. I thank you all for your presentations and for being patient with our Q&A. Thank you all for being here. Please join us again. If you aren't familiar with NSF, we are nationalsecurityforum.org. We will post a video of this program, and we'll also post the slides so you can look at them in more detail if you couldn't see them. We welcome you back. Like I said, our next Zoom program will be the end of July, and then we'll be back here in September. So thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful day, and enjoy the lovely view and a wonderful Nevada day. Thank you.